Let's talk about the middle of the org chart. We're going to talk about the kind of manager who makes you look at your org chart and wonder if it was drawn by a 5-year-old with a crayon in the dark. Now, early in our career, we operate under a very naive assumption, and that is title implies a compass. And you think, they're higher up on the ladder, right? Therefore, they know north. Then you walk into the room, you sit through your first few project reviews, and you realize something deeply unsettling. The person steering the ship doesn't have a map, they definitely don't have a compass, and worst of all, they're utterly terrified of the water. Today, we're looking at the rudderless arbitrator, the weak, directionless boss who doesn't make decisions based on strategy, ethics, or long-term institutional health. They make decisions based entirely on who's standing closest to them and whining the loudest. Now, I've worked with these types, and you probably have too, in corporate suites or large institutions. These are the managers who look like they got their position through a clerical error or a very polite inheritance. Now, because they lack any real internal baseline, so no foundational philosophy, no real grip on the actual mechanics of the work, they have to survive entirely on vibes and survival instinct. And what does a survivalist manager do when a heavy decision finally lands on their desk? They don't look at the data. They look at the factions. Now, on any given floor, you generally have two groups, right? So first you've got the heavy lifters, the analysts, the researchers, and operators who put their heads down, do the actual intellectual labor, and don't care about office politics because their work speaks for itself. Then you've got the other faction. It's the gossipy, low-output crowd. It's the folks who barely push a pencil but specialize in this high decibel complaining, passive-aggressive sidebar chats, and industrial-grade grievance politics. Now, what does a competent leader do? A competent leader looks at these two groups and protects the builders. They absorb the noise so the talent can create. A rudderless leader looks at those two groups, right, and they start to panic. They think, oh God, the whiny group looks upset, right? If I make the right call, they're going to create more hassle for me to deal with. I can't handle that energy. So, what do? They cave. They make completely incoherent, contradictory decision just to buy 20 minutes of quiet, while giving the team the side eye in the hopes that no one notices their uncalibrating decision-making. Now, what makes this fascinating and maddening, right, if you kind of let it get to you, is how these managers disguise their weakness. They try to dress up their lack of spine as diplomacy, right, or consensus building. But let's be very clear about the difference. Consensus building requires a goal. Pandering requires only a lack of standards. When a rudderless boss makes a call, it shifts like quicksand, right? 1 week, a certain protocol is sacred because a senior executive mentioned it in passing. Now, the next week, the protocol is quietly buried because someone two pay grades below them rolled their eyes. There's no philosophical anchor here. There's no core thesis, just pure reactive weather pattern management. And here's the psychological trap they fall into. They assume that because they avoided an immediate confrontation, they've successfully managed the room. But everyone sees right through it, right? The high performers watch the leader fold like a flimsy lawn chair under pressure. And something fundamentally shifts here. Respect here doesn't die in a dramatic explosion. It quietly exits the room, locking the door behind it. Now, here's the tragedy of the rudderless boss. They think their compromises are keeping the peace, but come on. Institutional physics does not work that way, we know that. When a manager refuses to anchor themselves to a standard, the vacuum doesn't stay empty. It fills with operational chaos. A weak decision at the top never stays between the boss and the person immediately affected. It sends shock waves straight down the line. The analysts have to completely redo 4 days of research because the goalposts move to appease an internal lobbyist, right? The clients get confused because the narrative changes every other week. And the people who actually know what they're doing are left standing in the wreckage trying to reverse engineer, right? The logic out of pure, unadulterated nonsense. And the worst part? When you try to bring logic to a rudderless manager, when you walk into their office, right, with clean facts, clean charts, and a rational path forward, they look at you like you're speaking Aramaic. Why? Because logic requires taking a stand. And taking a stand requires a spine. If they acknowledge that your rational data is correct, they have to admit that their previous gutless compromise was wrong. And an insecure, rudderless manager will sacrifice the entire project before they sacrifice their own fragile illusion of consistency. So then how do you navigate an environment, right, where the person steering the ship is essentially a ghost? Stop looking to them for validation. If you're waiting for a weak manager to recognize your brilliance, give you a coherent vision, or protect you from office politics, you're waiting for a vending machine to dispense a hug. It's simply not built for that. Adjust your expectations downward, and you'll never be disappointed. Also, build your own local containment field. Let the organizational chaos swirl around them. Do your work with pristine documentation, keep your own counsel, and realize that their administrative weakness is not your intellectual burden. Protect your work, protect your team members who actually pull their weight, and keep your name clean. Because at the end of the day, titles can only be handed by HR as a participation trophy. But authority, that's earned on merit. And long after the rudderless arbitrator has rotated out to another department to confuse a brand new set of people, your competence, your reputation, and your skills will still be entirely yours. Stay sharp, keep your lens clear. See you in the next one.